In a quiet suburban neighborhood, a young mother was gunned down in front of her children. Police searched for answers but found nothing. Then family members offered a startling clue. It would take local and federal agents to untangle an intricate web of money, drugs, and murder to capture the architects of a heartbreaking crime. Two young boys were the only witnesses to their mother's murder. The horrible crime appeared unmotivated, senseless, and random. I am Dalton Reese, former head of the FBI's New York office. The victim, the wife of a prominent Atlanta attorney, was also a woman burdened with a secret. The FBI believed that secret led to her death. They hoped its discovery would also lead to her killer. Travelers returned home at the end of the holiday weekend. 39-year-old Maren Cole and her two children had spent the long weekend with her parents in Florida. Her husband, a well-known lawyer and judge, was away on business. After a 9-hour drive, they arrived safely in their suburban Atlanta neighborhood of Marietta. The house was dark as they pulled into the driveway, but it was not empty. Maren did not see a man waiting in the shadows of the garage. He brandished a weapon. The gunman forced her back into the SUV. The terrified woman had a 6-year-old at her side and a 4-year-old still asleep in the car. She had no choice. The man put his gun to Maren's head and told her to drive toward the city. She followed instructions. As they reached an empty development, he told her to turn off. She refused. She pleaded with him to let her children go. He answered with a single gunshot to her head. As the gunman grabbed her purse and fled, the vehicle kept rolling with the children still inside. When it came to a stop, Maren's 6-year-old son had to reach across his mother's body to turn off the ignition. He unbuckled his groggy 4-year-old brother from his car seat, then ran to the nearest house. There, a neighbor called 911. Officers responded to the report of a possible homicide. Cobb County police were dispatched immediately. Homicide detectives arrived as officers fanned out to search for the gunman. Police briefed them on the spot. The two young boys who witnessed the shooting identified the victim as their mother, Maren Cole. Their father, Baron Quill, was out of town. Police were already trying to contact him. Forensic technicians examined the vehicle where it had stopped. There might be trace evidence outside as well as inside the car. An analysis confirmed what the boys had told police. The gunman was sitting directly behind Maren when he pulled the trigger. Blood spatter patterns suggested he had used a shotgun. Detectives knew it would be difficult to get detailed information from children so young, especially after such a traumatic experience. The oldest one, 6 years old, would try his best. He said the killer was a black male wearing jeans, a sweatshirt, and a cap. He could not be more specific. The boy did not know which way the killer had run after he grabbed his mother's purse, but he said the weapon looked like a pirate's gun that you would see on television. Detectives were not sure what he meant. Maybe the autopsy would tell them more. Detectives tracked down relatives living in the area to take custody of the boys until their father could be located. Police learned the family's address by running the plates on the vehicle. They continued the investigation at the Quill home where the abduction had occurred. In the living room, they found a security rod lying next to a sliding glass door. The killer had likely entered the house there. The home security system had not been activated. No alarm sounded as the intruder entered. Perhaps a burglar had taken advantage of the lack of security, and Maren surprised him when she returned home. Whoever the burglar was, he had left no trace evidence at the home. There was little to go on, according to Cobb County Chief Detective Tristan Hale. At this point, they just really did not know what had happened. This was an upper-middle-class neighborhood. This was a mother with her two children, and this type of crime simply did not occur in the area at all. The most serious crime they usually saw was vandalism. Initially, they were truly baffled as to what had happened and why. Maren's eldest son worked with a police sketch artist and described the man in the dark who had killed his mother. The drawing of a thin black man wearing a knit hat was released to the public, but the 6-year-old's description was too vague to elicit any viable leads. The victim's husband, Baron Quill, was contacted at his hotel in Montgomery, Alabama. He returned to Atlanta immediately. As a criminal defense attorney, Quill was aware he would be considered an early suspect in his wife's murder. He had his own attorney present when he spoke to authorities. They quickly established his alibi so police could pursue more promising leads. Detectives confirmed that at the time of the murder, Baron Quill was in Alabama. He had been visiting a client incarcerated in the Montgomery jail. The grieving husband assured police that he and Maren had a strong marriage. He would do anything he could to help find her killer. Quill agreed to walk detectives through the house. As far as he knew, the doors were locked and the security rod was in place when he left for Montgomery. He explained that they had intentionally left the alarm off because a plumber was scheduled to fix the hot water heater over the weekend. Quill led detectives to the basement where he kept his home office. He said he usually had about $1,500 locked in the safe. Now it was open and empty. Its combination was hidden in a nearby file. Only he and his wife knew it was there. Perhaps Marin had taken the money on her trip to Florida. It was also possible that the burglar had found the combination and taken the cash. Ultimately, Quill could not specify how much money, if any, was missing. To police, nothing else in the house seemed disturbed, and no clues pointed to the killer's identity. A lot of people were frightened. A lot of people simply could not believe that this would happen to a mother in front of her children, especially in the neighborhood where it occurred. There was a great deal of pressure on the department to find who had killed her. Police hoped the coroner's report would give them more. Lab examiners confirmed that Marin Cole had been killed with a .410 shotgun. To a child, if that type of weapon had been sawed off, it might look like a 17th century flintlock pistol used by pirates on television. Only the plastic wadding and buckshot were recovered from the SUV. Because no shell casing had been ejected, they would not be able to match anything to a specific weapon if one were later found. The examiner discovered no foreign hairs, fibers, or fingerprints on the body or clothing. The anonymous killer had left nothing that could lead investigators to his identity. Former Assistant United States Attorney Rylan Cole, like many members of the Atlanta community, was stunned by the news of the murder. They had a discussion that morning about the notoriety of the homicide, the fact that it was the wife of Baron Quill, who was known within the legal community. Having been a former assistant district attorney for Fulton County, Cole was familiar with Quill in his role as a criminal defense lawyer in a matter that was then pending in their office. A matter regarding the investigation of a particular drug dealer. Quill's lucrative criminal defense practice brought him into contact with many men accused of federal drug charges. Rarely does such a murder have a simple motive. Solving the case would not be easy. The following day, two women came to the Cobb County Police Station. Marin Cole's sister and her cousin had a file they needed to show detectives. Marin had entrusted her sister with the file 3 years earlier. At the time, Marin made her promise to take it to police if anything ever happened to her. It contained what appeared to be lists of Baron Quill's bank accounts and their balances. The women suggested that the papers might be related to Marin's attempt to divorce him. Her sister's marriage was not as strong as Quill had led police to believe. Marin wanted a divorce, but whenever she broached the subject, he threatened to use his legal connections to get sole custody of their children. Marin was trapped. If she ever hoped to divorce him and keep her children, she needed leverage. After an earlier incident, she had secretly copied some of Quill's files and given them to her sister for safekeeping. She suspected they outlined illegal activities he might be involved in. If that were so, they could be her only leverage against him in court. Investigators reviewed the files carefully. Perhaps they would help police determine whether Marin's death was a botched robbery or a carefully planned conspiracy. Cobb County detectives called the FBI office in Atlanta for help. They hoped that Special Agent Harlan Briggs could determine if Baron Quill's bank statements were somehow linked to the murder. They were contacted by the Cobb County authorities concerning the documents that had been brought to them by Marin's sister and cousin, which revealed that her husband had been involved in setting up offshore bank accounts and offshore corporations. It would take time for Agent Briggs and his team to unravel the names and finances on those documents to see if they had something or nothing to do with the death of Marin Cole. Marin Cole was laid to rest. Her two children were left motherless. Investigators still had no leads that pointed to the identity of her killer. Whoever had killed the young mother was still out on the streets. The FBI and local investigators continued their search for the lone gunman who shot and killed Marin Cole, the wife of a prominent Atlanta attorney, in front of her two young children. Marin's 6-year-old child had given a vague description of the suspect to police in Cobb County, Georgia, but they still had no solid leads. Copies of her husband's bank statements were sent to the FBI field office in Atlanta for closer scrutiny. Special Agent Harlan Briggs hoped to provide insight as to whether the documents might somehow be connected to Marin's murder. Once they reviewed these documents, it revealed that Baron Quill had set up offshore banks and corporations not only in the Turks and Caicos, but in Montserrat and in the Bahamas. These documents also showed that he had set up numerous corporations and nominee names in the Atlanta area. Nominees are people who in name only head dummy corporations for purposes of money laundering. Although Baron Quill had never been accused of money laundering himself, he was an expert on the subject. Former Assistant United States Attorney Rylan Cole was aware that Quill was not only a well-known lawyer, he was also a certified public accountant. Quill was known within the Atlanta legal community as a person who held himself out to be an expert in money laundering and, in fact, conducted lectures for law enforcement authorities at the state level on the subject. Investigating the finances of a man like Baron Quill would be a delicate business. He was well-liked and well-connected among Atlanta's power elite. He was well-known in Cobb County and also well-known in political circles, having been appointed as an assistant municipal court judge and having served as an assistant solicitor for Fulton County. He had a lot of friends in high political places and had helped on numerous campaigns of state and local officials. Investigators again met with Quill and his attorney. They told him they believed his business dealings could be connected to his wife's killing and asked him about his clients. Quill admitted that several were violent drug dealers who operated in dangerous circles in Atlanta. One in particular was reputed to have been a major cocaine supplier in the area. The dealer had returned home to Detroit after another of Quill's clients had allegedly forced him out of the South. Not long after, he was gunned down in front of his mother's home. The murder weapon, a handgun found later in a nearby alley, had been traced back to a gun shop north of Atlanta. Quill suggested that the dealer's remaining crew, or even those who murdered him, could have had Marin killed to send a message to the lawyer. Detectives secured a warrant to search the attorney's office to see if they could find any link to the killer in his papers. That night, local investigators and IRS agents conducted a thorough search of the office. They confiscated files, datebooks, and business calendars dating back several years but found no direct clues to the murder. In the margins of Quill's datebooks, agents did find notations of offshore accounts. The total deposited in these accounts far exceeded the amount Quill claimed on his taxes each year. It looked as if Baron Quill had used his expertise in money laundering to his own financial advantage. Local and federal officials met with representatives of the Atlanta United States Attorney's Office. They suspected Quill's illegal activities went far beyond money laundering. Money laundering was already on their radar screen. Secondly, they now had evidence coming out of the Quill home of offshore bank accounts. With those two clear facts, they felt there was a firm basis to open a formal investigation on Baron Quill. Prosecutor Rylan Cole learned that the DEA had arrested one of Quill's clients in a sting operation. His name was Donovan Pryor. Pryor had a reputation as a cocaine dealer in Atlanta. The day before, agents had intercepted one of his couriers in Texas and seized more than 100 kilos of cocaine. Inside the trunk of Pryor's car, agents found $50,000 in cash. They also found documents revealing that Baron Quill was more than Pryor's defense attorney. He had incorporated an Atlanta nightclub for the drug dealer. It was believed by law enforcement that the nightclub was a front to help launder the drug proceeds of the trafficking organization that Pryor was a member of. DEA agent Cale Mercer had participated in the sting operation to arrest Pryor. Prosecutor Cole hoped Mercer's drug trafficking case would help with the murder investigation. What had happened as a result of the homicide of Marin Cole was that the light got turned on Baron Quill's past, what he had been doing for the past several years. What was illuminated was that he had been involved with several drug traffickers in the Atlanta area. Investigators wondered how deep that involvement went. Police re-interviewed Quill's neighbors to see if they had missed anything. One close friend confirmed that Marin wanted to divorce her husband, but she was afraid of him. Not long before she was murdered, Marin confided that she had found some of her husband's documents that seemed suspicious. According to the neighbor, Marin said these were not simply lists of offshore accounts. They were stronger proof of criminal activities. About a week and a half before the murder, Marin explained to her friend that she now had the goods on Baron, that she had found documents or records indicating he had engaged in or was engaging in tax evasion, and that she was going to go to the authorities with this information so she could then get a divorce. If Marin had confronted her husband with the evidence, it might have motivated him to harm her. Investigators additionally found the name of a private investigator Quill had used. The private investigator admitted to agents that Quill had hired him to approach drug dealers about laundering their profits. He was listed as one of the owners, along with Baron Quill, of another Atlanta nightclub. According to Special Agent Harlan Briggs, they determined that he was an owner of a company, but through further investigation, they realized he was a nominee. When they say the word nominee, they mean he was the person legally responsible as an owner of the club, but in actuality, he was not. Baron Quill had constructed the entire scheme. According to the private investigator, Quill courted reputed drug dealers like Donovan Pryor, men who had a lot of cash but no place to invest it, without raising suspicions of the IRS. Quill, a money laundering expert, proposed depositing their drug profits in offshore accounts and in businesses like clubs that operated primarily on a cash basis. The money could then be filtered through legitimate financial institutions. The way you would launder the money is that even though it is still in cash, you would pay entertainers on paper $15,000, when in actuality, you pay them $5,000 in cash. Quill would receive thousands for each transaction. He was actively involved, knowing that these people were drug traffickers and what they were doing with their money. The object was to open corporations, mainly nightclubs, cash businesses, where they could easily hide their assets and run their drug proceeds through them. Authorities believed the connection between Baron Quill and drug traffickers had somehow led to his wife's murder, but the details were elusive. Weeks after the murder of Marin Cole, a man capable of murdering an innocent mother in front of her children remained at large. Federal and state authorities had still not found the lone gunman and still had no clues to his identity. Shortly before she was brutally murdered, Marin believed she had discovered papers in her husband's law office that documented his illegal activities. Former United States prosecutor Rylan Cole believed that Marin had likely threatened to expose Baron Quill with those documents unless he agreed to a divorce. That began to give them a feeling that Marin Cole was murdered to keep her mouth shut about her knowledge or her belief about her husband's role and involvement in laundering drug money for drug traffickers. Baron Quill not only represented violent drug dealers, he had gone into business with them. Investigators now had evidence that Quill's clients were laundering money through several nightclubs. If his wife had threatened to expose him, Quill, as well as his clients, had a lot to lose. The FBI took a hard look at the nightclubs the attorney had incorporated. Special Agent Harlan Briggs had to wade through piles of state records, searching for a name that could link Quill directly to the murder. They started reviewing company and corporation records and liquor licenses and business licenses that Quill had incorporated. They started looking at these different clubs to see who actually owned them. Major drug suppliers like Donovan Pryor contributed the funds. A middleman purchased the clubs, and Quill set up the entire deal, as DEA agent Cale Mercer discovered. They did not really trust Quill to launder money in offshore bank accounts. It was too elaborate. They wanted their money where they could touch it, where they could feel it, where they could use it every day, where they could buy cars with it. And so the laundering, in essence, turned toward the laundering of money through nightclubs, through the incorporation of the nightclubs. FBI agents interviewed employees of the nightclubs. Over time, they were able to piece together the structure of the business, its owners, and its profits. To attorney Rylan Cole, it was like assembling a complex puzzle. The picture of how the nightclub money laundering was structured was really developed through insiders, through inside drug traffickers who ultimately decided to cut plea agreements and to cooperate and provide evidence. But nothing from the nightclubs pointed to Marin Cole's killer. After months of frustration, Cobb County Police finally got a break. A detective working on the case got a tip from his brother, a deputy in nearby Fulton County. The deputy remembered seeing Baron Quill's name in the file for a businessman who had an outstanding arrest warrant. The businessman's name was Soren Blake, wanted for writing bad checks on one of Quill's accounts. Of all Quill's business associates and clients, Soren Blake was a name he had never mentioned to police. Authorities quickly learned that Soren Blake and Baron Quill were involved in several businesses together. These included construction, renovation, and mortgage companies. Quill had also defended Blake in several minor brushes with the law. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead they had left. Through Baron Quill, Soren Blake had been granted access to some of the most prominent individuals within the city. Quill would take Blake to some of the big political fundraising functions. And all of a sudden, Blake was very presentable. He could mingle and not be embarrassed at cocktail functions and engage in conversations. He was living this wonderful life, and the way he got there was through Baron Quill. A few days later, the young businessman agreed to questioning after police discovered records of calls between him and Quill on the day of the murder. Soren Blake said he had been in business with Baron Quill for almost a year. He claimed the phone calls were all job-related. He knew nothing about Maren Cole's murder. The detectives had Blake arrested on the bad check charge and then released him on bond. They wanted to see which one of Quill's associates got nervous when they heard Blake was being investigated. The plan worked. A confidential informant contacted police. The word on the street was that Soren Blake had been looking for a hitman prior to Maren Cole's murder. He had pressured one of his employees to help him find someone to kill a woman who he claimed stood in the way of a lot of money. The employee gave Blake a name, Jalen Voss. Voss was a drug addict with a long rap sheet, including armed robbery. He needed money. Maybe he would be interested. Although the informant did not mention Baron Quill by name, investigators finally had a potential link between the victim's husband, Soren Blake, and a hitman. Detectives interviewed Soren Blake again. They questioned him about his relationship with Quill. He claimed no involvement in the murder. Police felt he was lying. They detained Blake and revoked his bail because of the flight risk. They wanted him in custody when they went after Jalen Voss. Detectives immediately secured search and arrest warrants for a house in College Park where Voss was staying. They proceeded with caution. If Voss was capable of killing an innocent woman in cold blood, there was no telling what he might do when cornered. Cobb County Police circled a home in College Park to arrest the suspected hitman. The woman who answered the door said she was not sure if Voss was home. An initial sweep of the house produced nothing. Still, they kept up their guard. One officer thought he heard movement in a bedroom. It was Jalen Voss. He was unarmed. Voss was booked and charged with murder. He claimed that Soren Blake, Baron Quill's business partner, had offered him $5,000 to kill Maren Cole, but Voss was too scared to go through with it. He said Blake was the one who had caused Maren's death. Voss admitted that he had carjacked the family, but when Maren stopped, he said that he could not pull the trigger. At that moment, Soren Blake ran up to the car, screaming for Voss to shoot. Blake grabbed the shotgun and it went off, killing Maren. Both men then fled in Blake's car. Though police believe Voss was downplaying his role, Maren's 6-year-old son was the only other witness they had to refute his claim. He remembered only one shooter. The boy would be forced to identify the man who terrorized his family from a lineup unless Soren Blake corroborated Voss's story. Authorities charged Soren Blake with conspiracy to commit murder, but Blake refused to confirm or deny Voss's statement. Cobb County Police notified Baron Quill that Soren Blake and Jalen Voss had been formally charged with his wife's murder. He received the news at Maren's parents' house in Florida, where he was vacationing with his sons for the holidays. His relatives later said that while the rest of the family expressed relief, Baron Quill did not. He seemed despondent. The arrests of Blake and Voss had made national headlines. Quill was caught in that same spotlight and refused to give any statements to the press. Because the suspected hitman's story conflicted with Quill's son's version, the 6-year-old was asked to view a suspect lineup. Police explained that though he would be able to see 5 men staring at him, they would not be able to see him. The one-way mirror would prevent that. When the child said he was ready, investigators called for the men. All of them resembled the boy's description of his mother's killer. Detectives reassured him that he could take as much time as he needed. But it was no use. The child was either too young or too frightened to remember the killer's face. When relatives tried to reach Baron Quill in Florida to inform him, he was nowhere to be found. Quill left the company of his in-laws and returned to his hotel room, where no one heard from him. The following morning, they tried to reach him on the telephone. They tried to find him, and there were no responses. Concerned, Maren's father rushed to the hotel where Quill was staying. Baron Quill had swallowed a handful of sleeping pills and washed them down with beer. The manager of the hotel quickly called an ambulance. He had apparently attempted to take his life after hearing that Soren Blake, this business partner of his, had been arrested for the murder of his wife. Marin's father found a note written in Baron Quill's handwriting on the table beside the bed. In the locked hotel room, Quill had written a long, rambling note apologizing for the pain and suffering his lifestyle had inflicted upon his family. He wrote that Marin was a great woman. Then, on the day before the holiday, Baron Quill swallowed a handful of sleeping pills, enough to kill him. He lay on the bed, barely breathing. If he died, the truth about his wife's murder might die with him. Baron Quill, the once prominent Atlanta attorney now suspected in his wife's murder, lay motionless in a Florida hotel room from an overdose of sleeping pills. He was rushed to a nearby hospital where they were able to revive him. After his release, he held a press conference. He told the public that he was very depressed and that the media was not making it easy. Quill had gone to the extent of establishing residency in Florida to avoid the attention. But he believed that justice would soon be served. The FBI believed justice would soon be served as well. Convinced that Baron Quill had used his business associate Soren Blake to hire a hitman to kill his wife Marin, the team of federal and local investigators would use federal racketeering statutes known as RICO to prosecute Quill. Building a RICO case to prove Marin Cole had been killed to protect her husband's illegal activities meant outlining those activities in detail. The RICO statute attacks. Basically, this conspiracy of individuals who are out committing all types of different crimes, not necessarily together, but all for the benefit of this criminal group to exist, to continue to exist, and to make money. A federal grand jury named Quill as an unindicted co-conspirator in the homicide. Though Quill's partner Soren Blake had remained silent after 7 months in prison, investigators hoped the public indictment might encourage Blake to testify against him. Not long after, the Atlanta United States Attorney's Office received a phone call that Soren Blake was ready to cooperate in exchange for sentencing consideration. For Blake's long-awaited statement, investigators secured a remote location in Georgia that would be monitored by chopper surveillance. DEA agent Cale Mercer was part of the team that needed to make sure nothing went wrong. They were there before Blake was brought in. His location had been kept a secret from everybody involved. The only people who knew where Blake was actually being held at that time were the Cobb County Police Department. Blake at that time was a key witness in this investigation, and his safety was paramount to everyone. Inside a fortified house, Soren Blake told investigators that he and Quill were not just partners in the construction business. They were also involved in laundering drug money. Blake told FBI Special Agent Harlan Briggs the details of the scheme. Quill wanted him to try to solicit drug clients in the various nightclubs and bring them to him so he could launder their money, and in turn also set up Blake in several businesses. Blake owed his success to Quill. He also owed the attorney $70,000 in business debts. Baron Quill approached Soren Blake, indicating that Marin was now going to try to divorce him and take everything he had, and he was not going to let that happen. He could not afford to allow her to do that to him, and he wanted her killed. Blake refused initially. Although he had been involved in drug dealing, he had never been involved in murder. He told Quill they should just let her have the house and the kids and the cars. Quill said he had worked so hard he was not going to let her have it. Blake said that Quill planned the murder for several months. His first idea was to have Marin shot in his office, but he decided the couple's home was a better location. Quill was to pay Blake $25,000 for the hit. Quill wanted to be out of town and for Blake to commit the murder as a burglary, basically, in front of his children, which is very unusual. He told Blake that the kids would get over it, that they were young, and it would not bother them that their mother was murdered. Blake admitted he did not have the nerve to kill an innocent woman, so he hired Jalen Voss. Voss shot Marin Cole. Blake drove him away from the scene. Since he cooperated, Blake earned 12.5 years for his part in setting up the murder. The hitman he hired, Jalen Voss, was sentenced to life without parole. For the time being, Quill was still a free man. Quill had custody of his 2 children. The concern during this time was that there could be some harm done to the children, and Quill was aware that he had been watched. The media was still down in Florida at the time. He knew that people were watching him daily, and they had to develop a plan to get Quill out of the house where there would be no harm done to the children or to himself and try to effect the arrest. The agents knew Quill hated the press. They posed as reporters, lurking around the condo, hoping to elicit a response from the wanted man. The game plan at that time was to have Quill come out and check them out, which he had done previously to other people who had been parked in the area. The plan worked well. He came downstairs. He called the police. Local officers arrived, aware of the ruse. Baron Quill emerged from his condo to file a complaint. Instead, he was arrested. Baron Quill pleaded not guilty to the charges against him, but separate state and federal juries found him guilty of racketeering, money laundering, murder for hire, and murder. He was sentenced to 4 life terms with no chance of parole for elevating his greed beyond the life of his wife and children. He will never be free again.